Hi, I'm Daniel Kirkpatrick with DK Percussion, Principal Timpanist of the Greenville Symphony, and I'm here with Will Harris of Harris Percussion, who is going to help me to rehead a Dresden timpani today. This is a American drum 29-inch Mark 11, which means the master screw is on the outside. We'll give you some close-up shots of taking the head off, removing everything, getting it set up for a new head. We're going to replace the Teflon tape. And then we're also going to tune the head roughly at the end. Let's get started. I'm just going to go ahead and remove tension rods. The tension rods don't have to be kept in any certain order, though a lot of people do that. Usually we would block up the spider, but for right now we're just getting the tension rods off. We'll block up the spider when we go to tune the timpani. Removing the Teflon tape. This is still good, but I'd rather replace it while I have the head off. One symptom of needing new Teflon tape is when you lower the pitch on the tuning gauge, it might come back and say C, but it actually sounds sharper. That means the head has some residual tension in it. So that's not really been happening with this, but it's time to replace it. What I'm doing right now is just making sure there's no adhesive left on the bearing edge. This is steel wool. So I like to place my seam usually away from the playing spot. In this case, it's going to be right about here. I'm going to put it next to the tuning gauge. So the method that I use to get a perfect seam on my Teflon tape is I fold over one end before I put it on the drum. And then when I put it on the drum, I'm going to keep a little bit of tension on the tape as I go around, pressing it onto the top of the bearing edge. So I'm going to get this, slowly go around by putting just enough tension on it to keep it flat. And if this wrinkles, you're going to want to start over or cut it and make multiple seams. So I've come to the end and I'm just going to cut the tape off. And to keep this from being impossible to pull up later, fold it over. I find it easier to fold at an angle. And now I'm going to go around the entire drum and just get everything adhered to the inside and outside. I'm not pressing hard because I just want it to lay down first. We'll put a little more pressure on it in a moment. Work out any air bubbles. If you've ever replaced a glass screen protector on a cell phone, this is a very similar process. So I've gone around this direction. I'm just going to kind of go the opposite direction now and make sure it's really well adhered. And if you're watching this video and aren't quite familiar with Teflon tape, this is something you buy from a drumhead supplier, not the stuff you get in the store at the plumbing section. That Teflon tape is actually for making threads usable, so you can thread and unthread plumbing fittings. This similar function makes it so that the drum head doesn't stick to the bearing edge. All right, and now for the magic. So I have two sides. I've got this little side right here, and under that I have this other piece that was there first. What we're going to do is cut in between right here. So it's nicely adhered. Take the razor blade and just rock it across the bearing edge. Gently peel back. There we go. Now this tape stretches just a little bit. If that happens, just press it down pretty hard. And that's done. Now that we have the Teflon tape on, go ahead and remove the bowl. And the only reason I do this is so that it's easier to clean. Now on a Dresden drum or nicer instruments, the suspension hoop and the bowl aren't connected in any fashion. So the lip goes over the bowl, that's what holds this in place. Now you have access to everything, you can give it a good wipe. To make that easier, we're going to lift it up on the table. So once you've wiped down your drum using a microfiber cloth, if you'd rather get it a little bit more of a deep clean, you can use Windex. It also works as a great grease remover. Just make sure you don't remove grease from things like the master screw, the piston in the center. You can make sure there's some grease on the cam follower. All the moving parts that are usually lubricated don't need to necessarily be wiped. Once it's all wiped and clean, we're going to take it off the table, put it down on the floor, and actually reinstall the bowl, block up the spider using blocks. I have pieces of scrap wood. I actually find one thing that works really well is floor scraps or flooring samples from the store. They come in different thicknesses, and sometimes you can wedge one under the other. Another thing that works really well are door stops. So if you put the two door stops together and wedge them together, it can be an adjustable stop. What that does is it pushes this up like that. So when you insert the tension rods and put tension on the drum head, it's not going to fall down later, which can cause it can wreak havoc on the pedal system. So we're going to get this down, we're going to get the bowl reinstalled, and then we're going to get the head started.
Let's see. Should we take the pedal down?
That's set on a G, believe it or not.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Interesting.
In fact, that's at the end of comfort right there. That's I don't want to go back any farther than that.
Cool.
Usually I don't need a D on this, but I can get a D on this with the pedal right there.
Oh, wow.
In fact, I think that's where it's set now, is to have a D on top. In fact, what we're talking about is where the pedal range is stopped. I have it set so that when we tune the head, it'll be tuned to a G. So the master screw will be slightly lower than halfway. That way, when I tighten the head up with the master screw, it'll be more in the mid-range of the thread length. But if this pedal goes back too far, it can become uncomfortable for the player to have to reach back their feet. So I actually have it set to where it was on a G on the tuning gauge. I don't want it to go any lower than that. If I need an F, I just don't keep my foot on the pedal. So as I've mentioned in past videos, in working with timpani bowls and timpani frames, the Light company anyway, the Light's the American drum company, would put what's called a witness mark, which is just a straight scribed mark that goes from the suspension hoop onto the bowl, where the bowl was produced, or rather the bearing edge was produced on the suspension hoop. If there's any imperfection in either the roundness or the flatness of that suspension hoop, it'll translate to the bowl. If the bowl is in the wrong spot, clocked the wrong way, if you will, it can create buzzes, tension issues with the head. It may not even fit in the hoop if it's not round. Luckily, this is nice and round, it's nice and flat, so I'm not terribly worried about it, but we always want to line the witness mark back up. So I'm going to put the bowl back into the hoop, and I'm going to line up the witness mark. You want to make sure that this lines up with the cam. So the timpani head that goes on this drum, this is a 29-inch drum. For the Lights anyway, they use a 31.5-inch timpani head. Now, when I order timpani heads, I tend to order multiples, and I tend to also take them out of the box and grade them. And by grading them, I can tell how hard or easy it's going to be to install the head. This head has never been installed. I gave it a B when I graded it for a couple reasons. It's going to be slightly troublesome to install. If we're lucky, there's no trouble at all. Things that make a good grade timpani head. An A or a double A or even a triple A. Triple A's don't exist. There's no problem with them. That means everything is perfectly round. The seam that's in the the flesh hoop is perfect. This one is actually really good. It's nice and flat. 180 degrees away from that will be the seam in the insert ring. This one's actually really good. So if I was grading just the insert ring and the flesh hoop, this would be easily a double or a triple A. Now, what makes this lesser is if there's a ripple in the head, and usually they'll happen at one of those two seams, or if the head looks like it's tucked unevenly, so if you look across it like this, you might see some high and low spots. In this case, on this drum head, the seam area is a little bit high. So when they make these drum heads, they actually have really good quality control, but occasionally things happen in shipping. If I were to drop this head, it's going to instantly make the hoop not be round anymore. That's most likely the cause of the majority of issues that we have. That floppiness usually takes one letter grade. Again, this was a B, and I labeled it a B for two main reasons. One, that bit of floppiness. Now, I don't want this to be pre-tensioned. That's not something I want, but the floppiness is uneven. It's actually right in here, not over here. It's a little bit tighter over here. If I had to guess, this is gonna end up being the beating spot. The other reason is this is oversized by about a 32nd of an inch. I'd rather have a head be slightly undersized than oversized, but this should fit this drum just fine. We're about to find out right now. That's beautiful. All right. So what I'm doing right now is roughly aligning everything. It doesn't need to be perfect yet. We're gonna do a process that is really 2 or 3 extra steps, but what I'm doing is getting this roughly centered. We're gonna insert the tension rods, get it in some tension. We're not gonna spend a lot of time tuning it, but then we're gonna go around and find the best playing zone. The best playing zone, without having a real rhyme or reason for it, feels the best and sounds the best. And you will notice they all sound and feel different. You don't have to have a reason for why you like a spot. If you like it, that's your spot. Each drum should sound similar. I have a sound that I like and a feel that I like from the drum head. I can usually get them all to match. We'll show that process in a minute. So when you're putting the tension rods in, you want this, which is called the ear, to line up down here on the spider. And if I use, let's use a visual reference here. If this is my barrel nut, I want this to come in at 90 degrees. So if I have 90 degrees, this should thread in nice and evenly. If it comes in slightly crooked, it's going to either cross thread or be really hard to turn. And we fix that by simply giving either the hoop or the spider a wiggle. But what I like to do is I actually turn left to get started, and if you listen carefully, that click, that was a beautiful click. That click is where the thread engages into the thread. Now I can actually turn it, and it's a little hard to turn, so if I just give it a little bit of a wiggle one direction or another, I can find the spot where it's most comfortable. Now I can do that on either the top end or the bottom. When you're wiggling these, you may end up throwing the head off center, and that's okay. Right now, I'm gonna pull it this way and just wiggle this right there until that goes in easy. It doesn't need to be lined up yet. I am putting these finger tight just to the point where there's a gap showing between the nylon bushing on the ear. And even if you're fortunate enough to have somebody helping you do this process, you wanna have one person tension all these on their own because they're gonna know what's even and what's not. If you have 2 different people doing this, one may think, oh, I'm going 1/8 of an inch, the other goes 3/16 and think it's 1/8, you're gonna be lost. So now that we have all the tension rods in, I'm just going around 180 degrees from either side and making sure, using my fingers and knuckles to feel where everything is even. Because this hoop is nice and round, the head is nice and round, the reveal on the bottom is going to be the same, or same within a nice feel. And what I'm doing right now is feeling the bottom of the head to go from the suspension hoop to the hoop of the timpani head. Now the nice thing is when this has all the weight of the head, doesn't have any of the weight of the spider quite yet. If the head is good, the hoop is good, everything is nice and level, you should get a relatively recognizable pitch. So this I graded as a B, but so far it's acting more like an A. The head is actually going to be, knock on wood, fairly easy to tune. So what I'm gonna do next, go around and get this even first. I wanna make sure the spider is centered between the struts. And I'm just using my fingers to kind of feel, make sure it's even down here. And once that's even down there, come up to the hoop. So I want to make sure the tension rods are the same distance from the strut to the inside. And this doesn't have to be perfect because the strut may not be perfect. We just want it to be as close to good as we can get it. That looks good all around. So though I've centered the hoop and the head on the suspension ring, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's in the right position up here, so it may need to twist a little bit. Double check my evenness. Yep. Next, I'm going to, and this is again a one-person job, get down and pull up on the tension rod to put a little bit of upwards pressure on the spider and tighten the tension rods on both sides to keep everything as even as I can so that we don't pull the head one direction or another. Right now I'm just getting everything even, setting the foundation, if you will, until the hoop just barely moves and engages. And that way when I finger tighten these, everything should come out evenly. 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I'm doing is pulling up on the spider and turning each one. Now what I'm going to do, instead of going back and forth, I'm going to continue around the drum because I'm right-handed. I may end up turning just a little bit more with my right than my left. If I go all the way around the drum, it should all be even. So 5, 6, 7, 8. So if I hit this and then tune the lugs, you'll hear how much it goes up a little bit each time. A lot of people would say we're done and maybe fine tune the head a little bit and move on. And that's fine. Everything is even. It looks good. But there's actually a few more steps that we can do to get this drum to sound even better. Right now, the pitch is okay. The tone is okay. I'm going to not even touch the tension rods anymore. I'm going to use the master screw to bring the entire pitch up to somewhere in the middle range of this drum. So in this case, 29, a good pitch might be an A. And that's going to bring it up to, it's actually getting an A. That'd be impressive. Come on, be an A. Be an A. So we get it up to an A. Now the truth is the pedal is still set to that G that we had earlier, but we're not going to be leaving the head where it is. If we do, we'll have a couple more adjustments to make. So I have an A. Everything is pretty well locked in place. We're still sitting on the blocks. We're going to leave it there for the moment. And right now I'm going to check to make sure that we don't have any tension rods that are terribly out of tune. I'm actually feeling pretty good about this already. So I have the drum relatively tuned. It's not perfect. I'm going to go around and hit within each, we'll call it goalpost of a tension rod. I tend to go counterclockwise starting in what is the playing zone, which will be over the pedal. And this is where having help is great because you have two sets of ears, two opinions. Now, if it's just you doing this, it's whatever feels and sounds the best right there at the drum. Truth is, it's more heard from the audience perspective than your perspective. So having somebody stand 10, 15 feet away is really helpful. I liked 3, 6, and 7. So one interesting thing about this, the way this works, usually 180 degrees will be a match. So in other words, if you like 1, it's likely that 5 is going to sound good as well. So we're talking 1 is kind of cold, 2 and 3 are good. I liked 6 and 7, so 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it makes sense that I like those and he likes those. They could both work. So 3 is the one that we definitely both agree on. 6, 7. The nice thing is, again, I graded this as a B. Right now, I'm going to upgrade that to maybe A-. Sometimes that flap in the head isn't a problem at all. In fact, some of the flappy heads end up feeling the best. To me, that one is like deepest and open.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Come back here.
Surprise me. Play 2 or 3 different ones and mix that one in there somewhere. It wasn't the first one.
No.
I like the second and the third. Which one was the second?
Second was the one we discussed.
And that was the one I kind of liked the most.
Third one was the second.
Which was my second. That makes perfect sense. So even though it's not coming out on camera necessarily, the depth of the sound is nice. There's a nice fundamental. We're not listening to the tuning, but the feel and just the general depth just sounds good. And I hope it does come across on camera, the different sounds that you get from going around the drum. So what we're gonna do is leave the blocks in place, loosen this again, starting with the master screw, loosening all the tension rods back to where there's what I would call a double nickel gap, so it's about 1/8 of an inch. And then one person lifts the hoop, the other turns the head like a steering wheel to get it in the spot. Now if you don't have the blocks underneath the rocker arm is gonna continue to fall as you do this, and it's gonna keep tension on those tension rods. We don't want that. Do you want to scoot or hold?
I'll hold.
All right. So Will's going to pick up the head, or rather the hoop. He can pick up from the hoop or the ears, doesn't matter. And I'm going to scoot the head this direction. So now that we have the head where we want it, it's going to recenter, make sure everything is lined up correctly. And we're going to do that in 4 different ways. First way, testing with my feeler gauges, if you will. Next, I'm going to make sure that we get all this centered on the strut, which we've already done before. So right now I'm just pushing my fingers down through it, getting it roughly centered. Double check that the spider is centered on the struts, which it was not. When you turn everything, you introduce a twist. You want to make sure that you remove that twist. This doesn't need to be centered between the ears. The strut just, it holds up everything, and it's better to center it. It's better for my OCD to have it centered. But what's really important again is that this ear lines up with that barrel nut so that this can turn easily. So right now, that can turn relatively easily, but it's slightly off. And down here, this doesn't turn very easy. I'm gonna center that, and now it turns very easy. So I think everything is centered. The head pretty centered. I'm going to go back and do that first method I mentioned, the fingers. And so we've done 3 centering methods here, all real quickly. Fingers on the underside, lining up the strut and the tension rod, lining up the spider and the strut. The 4th way we're going to do after we put a little bit of tension on the head. So we have some tension. The next method, take a stick, drumstick or a mallet, go straight in. Take your thumb, put it up against the side of the hoop, go 180 degrees across to the other ear. And I'm doing this all on the right side of the ear, so it's always on the same. Right here, this is significantly out of center. So if I do it again over here, go back over here, I have about 1/8 of an inch less on this side. So to make up that gap, I'm going to pull the entire drum head about half that distance. And I need a little less tension on the drum right now, so what I'm going to do, a little less tension on the master screw. There we go. Check it again. Thumb up against the hoop, drumstick level. A little bit far on this side, so I'm just going to give it a little bit of a pull. So if I do it on the left side here, I'm going to do it on the left side on the other side. Thumb is touching the hoop. Stick is touching the suspension hoop. The left side over here. A little bit farther. There we go. So that's even, and then I'll do the others. The reason I like to do this with a little bit of tension is so that when I'm walking around the drum, if I happen to catch my shirt on it or hit it or something, I'm not going to ruin everything I've done already. So when this and this are even, theoretically, these should all be the same, but you just want to double check. So right now my thumb is hitting everything the same. If your hoops, either the counter hoop or the suspension hoop, aren't round, this isn't necessarily going to give you even results. So you want to make sure that you only compare the 180s. Now, if you have like a D-shaped hoop or something, that's just going to be an issue you have to contend with. Take that back up. I think what I would like to do is put a little tension there. Now I'm going to go around and do quarter turns on opposites, or half turns. Half turns. And just like tuning any drum head, go directly across, keeping it as even as you can. It's a slow process, but taking your time now will save you a lot of time and frustration later. So we're at a very low pitch. We're not quite to a G yet. So I'm going to take one more half turn around it, put a little bit of pressure on the center of the head to make sure it's seated, and then I'll use the master screw to go the rest of the way. Actually sounds pretty good. So I have two apps I like to use while tuning timpani. One is called Tiny Piano, and it just gives me a nice pitch reference. The other one is called Tunable, which can actually show the history of a pitch. And I like to use that when I'm just double checking my ears. I wouldn't use it to tune timpani in a performance setting. I only use it to go, I think I hear something going sharp. I think I hear something going flat. In this case, we just need a G. So I'm going to go up a little bit, and this is why we leave room in the master screw. So we're at our pitch. There's a couple things funny about it, but we're going to worry about those in a second. So now tuning timpani is easier at the ear level. So rather than getting down on knees and working around, we're going to lift this up on the table and actually work to do a little bit of fine tuning. I have it at a G. I like that G, but I'm actually going to move this up to an A because that's an easier pitch to work with on the drum. So at this point, you can get rid of your blocks, but in our case, we're just going to lift straight up. You got the heavy side, sorry. So while we have the drum up here, we've tuned it to an A. I want to play it from my playing zone at this point, and I'll explain quickly the channel tuning system, but I hear the pitch immediately going up. So there's a couple things we're going to fix on that. We'll cut the video right now, go for 30 seconds on the channel system idea. So the channel system is pretty popular for tuning timpani, and it works in a very simple system, or simple idea anyway. This is the playing zone right here. So these 4 tension rods make up what we call the primary channel. And the idea is that when I hit the drum here, it immediately makes a vibration over here, and it takes more time to get to what we call the secondary channel, which will be these 4 tension rods or lugs. So if I hit the drum and the pitch is nice and even, everything is in tune. If I hit it and it immediately doesn't have a discernible pitch, something is wrong in your primary channel. So if I hit this and I get a pitch and it goes down, something in your secondary is low. If it goes up, something is high. If it has a wave to it, it can be both high and low. This drum we just finished tuning should ideally have a relatively flat line sound. So the app Tunable shows me the history. If I hit this drum, ideally we're going to see a pretty flat line D. So to me, the D is slightly flat, which it shows there, and I apparently talk in a bunch of different keys, but it's actually staying relatively stable. That flutter can come from a number of things. It can be bearing edge issues, it could be a room, it could even be a fan over top, so be careful where you tune. But this drum is relatively in tune. If the pitch went down, again, something in the secondary would be low. If the pitch went up, something would be high. So back from the channeling system, the averaging system, I also sometimes call this the tap, tap, bang system because simply put, you go by each lug or tension rod and you give it a light hit, listen to the pitch, and then you give it a bigger hit and you listen to the whole head. So tap, tap, bang. I can tell that this is higher than the rest of the head because that pitch that's quiet is higher. So we tune that down lower, that's going to make the head sound better. Using the averaging system works better for cheaper drums or drums with only 6 lugs or 7 lugs if you have one of those. But in this case, I only use that if I'm either in a rush, they're not my drums, usually also in a rush at the beginning of a gig, or if I just don't have time or the clarity, like in a silent room, to get the pitch just right. So that's more of a backup system for me. In this case, I'm gonna go around and kind of use the averaging system, but I'm just gonna use the taps to figure out what needs to be fixed first. When I hit this drum, we're listening for an A, and we've already hit this and we know it's gonna go up. But I'm curious how long that A lasts. If it lasts a second or longer, then we know the primary is good. I would say the primary is pretty good. In fact, the A is relatively stable. It just has a slow climb. So if I go, it's a little high. So the fact that this is high and we've already determined that that's high, if I lower this one, it's gonna lower that one a little bit as well. So we're gonna worry about the primary channel first. So I've tuned my primary pretty well. If I hit it, and again, we know that it's gonna go up slightly, but if I hit it and I have that immediate pitch, I know I'm good, but I can still hear the pitch creeping up, so that means something in the secondary is high. This one's not as high as it was a second ago. This one is higher. And I have two ways of tuning this out. I can just do what I'm doing right now. And then checking it. I'm still hearing a high pitch, and this is where I can determine which one is high and actually tune it while it's ringing and listen to the pitch kind of settle in. I'm guessing it's either this one or this one still. So what I'm gonna do is hit it. Though it's not showing up on camera, there's a wave to the pitch, and that comes from a couple different things, possibilities anyway. The head could be pulling off one side or the other, so if I just loosen this too much, I may need to go to the other side and check that that's not too loose now. But also it could be that now that I've messed with this a little bit, something in the primary is off. And again, if you have a fan in the room, that can also mess with the pitch, so make sure that you're not in a moving air system. In this case, I actually hear this lug right over here is low. Why it did that, who knows? The wave is slower though. So that wave in the pitch is for one reason in this case. This one was low, this one's high. So it's actually competing with each other. So I've already raised this one, now this one is high. If I take it down, and I could do this while playing it, and I can kind of smooth that wave out. So I've actually spent more time on this fine-tuning it than I usually would. I figure it's more for the benefit of the video. The nice thing about getting a drum in tune quickly when you put on a new head is it will stretch and settle more stably. So ideally, if you can do this at the end of a semester, at the end of a season, where the heads aren't going to be played on for a little while, they will actually last longer and sound better initially. So what I usually like to do at the end of our season here in the Greenville Symphony, May, I will replace heads. They won't get used until the beginning of next season, or at the earliest in a July concert. And usually what happens, walk into the first rehearsal, the heads will be slightly out of tune, but they will feel nice and they will actually sound better longer. So get the heads settled and leave them as long as you can. If I had a rehearsal right now, this head is not going to last as long simply because it's not going to be able to settle into its spot. So I have about a week until these are going to be used. They will sit in their cases and settle. I will come back to that first rehearsal and I fully expect them to be slightly lower and maybe slightly out of tune. Now by that, I mean maybe one tension rod goes a little lower than the other, but that's actually less likely to happen because it is in tune right now and it's in a stable environment. So to review, we've centered the head, we've put the new head on, we've fine-tuned it, which we don't necessarily need to do right away, but it helps, using, in our case, the channel system. I think we're done.
That's a wrap.
Hopefully this video was helpful for you to rehead your own Dresden timpani or even just perform some basic maintenance on it. If you have questions, leave them in the comments. If you liked this video, if you could like it or share it, that really helps the YouTube algorithm. Visit Harris Percussion if you need some tuned pipes. Come check out my YouTube channel if you need some percussion help on your timpani. If you need some timpani help on your timpani. Or if you're just interested in general Dresden timpani repairs. Thanks for watching. Catch you on the next one.